Welcome back, defenders. Jake here. Ukraine's counteroffensive has been going on a little over a month, so let's check in and see how it's going. Ukraine concedes troops advancing, not so quickly. What does the article say? Ukraine acknowledged Friday its troops were not making speedy headway in their counteroffensive to recapture territory in the east and south of the country from Russian forces. Today, it's advancing not so quickly. This was told to reporters by the head of the presidency, Andriy Yermak. If we're going to see that something is going wrong, we'll say so. No one is going to embellish. Because we live in democracies with freedom of speech and freedom of the press, it's okay to have these discussions in order to find solutions. So here's an article from the New York Times. After suffering heavy losses, Ukrainians paused to rethink their strategy. So here's the quote that everyone is latching onto from this New York Times article. In the first 2 weeks of Ukraine's grueling counteroffensive, as much as 20% of the weaponry it sent to the battlefield was damaged or destroyed. Why is this? And it's because the Russians knew this was coming. A counteroffensive primarily focused in the Zaporizhia region. So they had a year to prepare for it. They knew it was coming. And Ukraine still is making progress in Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and especially around the flanks of Bakhmut. But considering their losses to achieve these gains, no, it's not sustainable long term. So we need another strategy. We need to figure out what's next. And here's Jessica Berlin perfectly breaking down the situation. The counteroffensive is moving slowly because we didn't send Ukraine enough artillery, long-range missiles, air defense, jets, tanks, and armored vehicles in time to enable rapid advances against heavily mined Russian defensive lines backed by air support across a 1,000 kilometer front. So maybe people in the West were too optimistic about Leopard 2 tanks and potentially Russians surrendering en masse or their front lines collapsing. So yes, this fight is going to go on a little bit longer and it's going to be more difficult, but Russia is still going to lose. And what the Russians did, I think it's obvious what the biggest problem is they just put down millions of landmines everywhere in Ukraine, pretty much guaranteeing they're not going to advance, but to also stop the Ukrainians from advancing on them. And Kyiv received less than 15% of the quantity of demining and engineering material, including MICLICs. They asked for this from Western partners ahead of their counteroffensive. Some of this equipment only arrived last week. So delays in demining equipment prevented there from being a lightning-fast counteroffensive. So Ukraine's going to need more of this kind of stuff. This doesn't look very expensive. It doesn't look very high-tech. Abrams tanks are showing up at the end of August. Hopefully, they'll be bringing a lot more demining equipment. But the problem with tanks, driving slowly through a field to clear a path for armored personnel carriers, is they're easy targets for Russian artillery. Russia is waiting to see demining equipment, and then they're going to hit them with their artillery. So Ukraine knows this, and they've been going after Russian artillery very aggressively. Kyiv's growing counter-battery advantage. While the counteroffensive grinds on, Ukrainian artillery teams are hunting down their Russian counterparts with increasing efficiency. So Ukraine is using all of their reconnaissance drones to find Russian artillery and then HIMARS them out of existence. Drones plus GIMLRs are doing the job the US Air Force would do if this was an American campaign. So Ukraine doesn't have F-16s. F-16s normally would be carrying out the combat operations to destroy all this Russian artillery. So Ukraine is fighting a war that's never been fought before, without an air force, and they have to use what they have, Gimlers launched from HIMARS, to take out every individual Russian artillery unit so that their tanks with demining equipment can clear the paths for their armored vehicles. That, in a nutshell, is what is going on and why the counteroffensive is going so slow. I'll link this video down below in a pinned comment if you want to see what it looks like when Russian artillery gets HIMARSed. Not a lot of survivors. And we don't really know what the situation in Russia is like. They don't have freedom of the press, they don't have freedom of speech, and one of the guys who was putting out daily videos speaking the truth, Prigozhin, he's not talking anymore. This picture surfaced of him allegedly at a Wagner camp in Belarus. This guy is a billionaire. When they raided his home in St. Petersburg, they found over $100 million in cash laying around his house. He could easily buy a tropical island somewhere and live out the rest of his life in peace. But this billionaire has plans. Plans for the Kremlin, plans for Putin in Russia. That's why he's choosing to camp in Belarus rather than just ride off into the sunset. So surprisingly, the last man willing to speak the truth in Russia is this guy, Girkin. And he's a terrorist, he's a horrible human being, but if he keeps saying stuff I like, I'm going to keep sharing his videos. So this is Girkin's assessment of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. I will not be revealing a military secret. The enemy knows the situation very well, unfortunately, but even in the secondary directions, the staffing of our forces again does not exceed 70%. In areas of the most fierce battles, it is significantly less. Of course, it does not compare to the situation at the end of last summer, early autumn. He's referring to the Kharkiv counteroffensive, when staffing was at 20%, and that was considered normal. But our forces are taking losses continuously, while the stream of reinforcements and reservists from the rear has died down. This means that if urgent measures are not taken, the enemy, unfortunately, has a chance to gnaw through our defense in Zaporizhia, and it will then be very difficult to stop them. And no Surovikin's line, which is still in a pretty deep rear, will stop the enemy if it's not occupied by trained, properly equipped, and experienced soldiers. If these troops die in the field, there will be no one to stop the enemy. This is the main question now. Will the enemy, the Ukrainians, be able to gnaw through our defense in the next 2 to 3 weeks, exchanging their soldiers for ours or not, and will they exhaust themselves earlier? So that's an honest assessment from a Russian on the Russian front. Let's get a report from the field, and we've got another video from Dmitry over at War Translated of another group of Russian soldiers complaining about their current conditions. These Russian soldiers are from the 72nd Brigade, and they're currently burying what is ever left of their comrades after they got HIMARSed in a grad truck. So they're pretty emotional, they're pretty fired up at the moment, but this is what they said in a video and then published on social media. If someone sees this video, this is how we bury our guys who didn't get to go home. They burned. This is due to a lack of ammunition. The crew fully burned in a grad. Film these tubes from the grad, all that is left of the grad. This is all because of our R-word commanders who couldn't do everything on time. There's going to be a lot of swearing in this video. They gave no coordinates, no targets. Lads were waiting for targets in the vehicle. They got hit and burned. F-word, C-word. I'm a deputy platoon commander. I command 5 vehicles. 72nd Brigade is the worst. S-word. I am the Special Platoon's squad commander. That's how we bury the guys who didn't get to go home. And then their wives call, Sveta calls asking why we didn't keep them alive. They're drinking. Come to your senses, effing commanders. Give us ammunition. Give us vehicles. Why send the youth here? People are dying for no reason. People here, they went through Chechnya, then Ukraine first time, Ukraine second time. I came to Ukraine in August. This is how we live. This is all we have. Carrying around ammunition. So he's showing how many bullets he has that he keeps in his pockets. We have 2 rifles remaining for 22 people. And ammo in our pockets. He has and he has. That's all we have. Effing scumbags. They forbid us from receiving ammunition. We drove to get ammo yesterday. I was the senior. The car was stopped halfway and turned back. They said no one's going to give us anything. It's an order from above. Think how we're going to fight further. And then he criticizes Sergei Shoigu. So that's a very bizarre video. Are Russian frontline troops suffering from a critical shortage of small arms ammunition and weapons? Why would 22 guys say they're sharing 2 rifles and they only got a couple pockets full of bullets? That's quite astonishing. So to give you an alternative for the Russians, aside from getting HIMARSed, here's a video put out by the Ukrainian forces showing what a Russian POW camp looks like. And to the best of my knowledge, this is only the second video I've ever seen of a Russian POW camp. It's 2.5 minutes long. I'll link it down below if you want to watch it. You can see what their daily routine is like. You can see what kind of food they're eating 3 times a day. I mean, these conditions look better than starving in a trench, trying to avoid cluster munitions. More bad news for Russian competence. Another general, this time Major General Vladimir Selverstov, was fired for speaking the truth. This was a competent general, well respected by his soldiers, trying to speak up about hardship on the front and all kinds of problems the Russians are having, and he was fired by Gerasimov and Shoigu. You're not allowed to speak the truth in the Russian military. Here's an interesting story. What Biden's troop call-up order to Europe really means. With a strained force in Europe, the order could recall hundreds of people who left the military to take the place of deployed troops. So in response to Russia's invasion last year in February, the United States increased their military personnel in Europe, and currently there's 100,000 U.S. military personnel stationed somewhere in Europe. I have friends, I know people currently stationed in Europe. They kind of really like the assignments. U.S. personnel enjoy being stationed, especially in Germany and the Netherlands. And Biden issued an executive order mobilizing 3,000 reservists. So these 3,000 reservists are going to be sent to Europe to augment the 100,000 already there. Now, what's controversial here is it looks like 450 personnel in critical field occupations are going to be pulled from the individual ready reserve component. So these are not real reservists. I'm currently in the IRR. I completely separated from the Air Force a year and a half ago, but because initially when I commissioned, I signed this 8-year contract, I still had this 2-year period in the individual ready reserve. In times of crisis, I'm going to be the first person to be called up and sent back into the military. So these 450 people, I don't know what their reaction to this will be. This is not very common, but trying times, and if Russia tries anything, the United States military needs to be ready. And that's what these people initially signed up for when they joined the military. They'll be treated well, they'll be compensated. Whatever civilian jobs they've taken, legally, those jobs have to be held for them until they can return to them. What else is going on? Erdogan says Putin agreed to grain deal extension. Okay, that's good news. Moscow denies agreeing to extend Black Sea grain deal. So what's happening here is Turkey is saying, we are now master of the Black Sea. Russia, you're irrelevant. You're going to lose this war. So Erdogan and Turkey are just dictating the terms, telling the Russians what they're going to accept. Erdogan's made it clear that if Russia does not accept whatever conditions they outline, then Turkish warships on their own are going to continue escorting Ukrainian grain vehicles. So I imagine Erdogan is making money. In addition, 400 million people around the world rely on Ukrainian agricultural exports. So if there's famine in the Middle East or North Africa, that would adversely affect Turkey. So Turkey's going to continue fighting for Ukraine to continue to be allowed to export and sell their agricultural goods. Moscow rejects South Africa's request not to send Putin to the BRICS summit. So in South Africa in August, there's going to be a BRICS summit, and Putin is saying he wants to go there in person. I find that astonishing, but South Africa is in a very difficult situation because Putin is an internationally wanted criminal by The Hague. South Africa is a signatory of the Rome Statute. They are treaty obligated to arrest Putin and hand him over to The Hague. So they're politely saying to Putin, please don't put us in this situation. Please don't come. Send Foreign Minister Lavrov instead. We'll hook you up with a video monitor, but you can't come to South Africa. South Korean president makes first ever visit to Kyiv, goes to see war crime sites. This is South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, and it's very important for these world leaders to continuously be making these visits to Kyiv. One, it keeps Ukraine in the headlines, so the entire world continues paying attention, but it also just weakens Russia, makes Russia diplomatically look worse when, heads of states, aside from President Xi, aren't lining up to go visit Putin in the Kremlin. South Korea came bearing gifts, announcing another $150 million assistance package. This is, since the beginning of the war, been non-lethal aid, but it's all good stuff. It all helps Ukraine. Thank you so much to South Korea. And what's going on with the South Koreans is actually pretty fascinating because they have a very robust defense sector. They have lots of capacity to make artillery shells as well as planes and tanks and armored vehicles. And what South Korea is doing, they're not directly sending military aid to Ukraine, but they are doing a lot of business with Poland. Lots of Ukrainian-made offensive material is making its way to Poland. Poland then feels like it can surrender its domestically produced tanks as well as old Soviet equipment. And what the Poles are doing is pretty ingenious, partnering with South Korea. This is a win-win in that South Korean defense companies are going to start producing military equipment in Poland. So this is good for South Korea's economy. This is good for Poland's economy. And anything produced domestically in Poland can now then be sold to other EU countries. If it was just South Korea making it itself, there might be regulations preventing sales to other EU companies in order to give preference to defense manufacturers in the EU. So it's a win-win-win. Good for South Korea, good for Poland, good for Ukraine. Taiwan's retired Hawk surface-to-air missile systems are heading to Ukraine. Taiwan recently retired its Hawk surface-to-air missiles, which the US may be buying back and sending to Ukraine. So this is not the most modern or capable air defense system, but whatever we got, just get it on a boat, get it on a plane, send it to Ukraine. Here's a hypothetical map. put out by Ukraine battle map showing what it would look like if 23 Hawk air defense systems from Taiwan were to be redeployed to Ukraine. So hopefully by this wintertime they can figure this out, and by January, Ukraine can have the best air defense system in Europe. It's just a big country. It's a lot of space to protect. Here's an interesting Pew Research Center poll showing views of Russia are largely negative, and in several countries, most are very unfavorable. So here in the United States, 62% of Americans now view Russia as very unfavorable, 29% somewhat unfavorable, and only 7% of Americans, when asked, view Russia favorably. So I know it's maddening whenever these American pro-Russian commentators spew their nonsense on social media, but they're appealing to a very small crowd. It's a very small percent of people who actually like and support Russia. These people are nuts. In Canada, it's at 12%, but when we switch to Europe, Poland's the winner. Only 1% think that Russia is somewhat favorable. Sweden, 3%, Spain, 5%. We got to jump to Asia and Japan, only at 5%. The only country in the world, because China wasn't polled, where Russia is viewed favorably is India, 57%. So, what the heck, India? Other good news for Ukraine, Bulgaria sends its largest military aid package to Ukraine, 100 armored vehicles. Yes, these are old Soviet pack armored vehicles, but armor is armor, and Ukraine knows how to maintain and operate these vehicles. UK Defense Ministry confirms that over 18,000 Ukrainian soldiers have trained in the country so far, with these training programs being continuous. Thank you so much to all the Brits out there. Final couple feel-good clips. The first one is from the NATO summit, and this is the Prime Minister of the Netherlands meeting with Zelensky.
How did you get that coffee?
You know what? Tea time.
No, you're fighting a war. This is your coffee. No, you have to stay home.
Okay, I will share you. 50% I will share it. Yeah.
So the Prime Minister of the Netherlands was envious how Zelensky somehow got coffee. Zelensky offered it to him, and he said, no. You're fighting a war, you get coffee first. Final feel-good clip is from the Superhuman Center. This is a fantastic organization that has been helping Ukrainian amputees be fitted with prosthetics. So this clip is of Dennis, a Ukrainian soldier who lost 3 of his limbs, learning to walk again.
Пойдем лучше, да?
Понял. Принцип. Я спускаюсь на покрытие, и он теряется в голове.
It's great to see him mobile. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, I love hearing from you guys. Let me know down below. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.